You didn't grow into yourself the way other people did. Your mind was shaped in small, quiet moments long before you had the language to describe what was happening. While other children learned the world through reassurance and warmth, you were learning it through tension, silence, and the subtle shifts in the people around you. You learned to brace before you even understood what you were bracing for. And because of that, you grew up carrying an awareness most adults never learn, even with decades of experience. But the strange thing is this: you never saw it as awareness. You saw it as survival. There were days when the room felt louder than the voices in it, when one person's mood filled the entire space like a hidden storm. You learned to sense that storm before anyone else did. You learned to read emotions like weather patterns, memorizing the smallest cues, the tightening of a jaw, the pause before someone spoke, the way their eyes shifted away for half a second. While other children were coloring, playing, laughing without thinking, you were studying the atmosphere for signs of danger. Your childhood taught you that peace was fragile, and you believed it was your job to protect it. You grew up thinking this sensitivity was normal. You didn't know that most children felt safe enough to just exist. You didn't know that most kids didn't have to evaluate every expression, every sound, every shift in tone. For you, it wasn't a skill. It was instinct, like touching something hot and pulling your hand away. Except you couldn't pull away. You had to stay in the room, stay alert, stay ready. You became the quiet observer, the one who noticed what others dismissed, the one who felt the emotional vibrations of every situation. Over time, people around you started saying things like, "You're so mature for your age," or "You understand things most kids don't." But they didn't realize that this maturity came at a cost. It wasn't earned, it was forced. And once that kind of maturity takes root, it never leaves easily. You learn to predict people, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. If you could anticipate what someone needed, maybe things wouldn't fall apart. If you could stay small, quiet, helpful, maybe the tension would ease. Maybe you'd feel safe for a moment. Maybe you'd finally get to breathe. As you grew older, this habit stayed with you. It followed you into friendships, into relationships, into every space you entered. You didn't just walk into a room, you analyzed it. You didn't just listen to people, you absorbed them. You understood their wounds, their fears, their unspoken thoughts, often before they said a word. And this made you incredibly empathetic, incredibly supportive, incredibly dependable. But it also made you tired in a way you couldn't explain, because while you were noticing everything about them, nobody was noticing you. You learned to carry the emotional weight of others without being asked. You learned to be the stable one, the understanding one, the one who could handle anything. But beneath that calm exterior, your nervous system was still that same child, scanning for danger, waiting for the next shift, preparing for emotional earthquakes that never showed up. And when they didn't, you almost didn't know what to do with the silence. People began to rely on you because you always showed up. You always listened. You always understood. But they didn't see the cost of that understanding. They didn't see that your sensitivity was not a gift you asked for. It was a shield you built in self-defense. And even now, in moments when you want to rest, you feel afraid that the moment you let your guard down, something will go wrong. You don't trust peace. Not really. peace feels temporary, like a break in the storm rather than the end of it. So when life finally becomes calm, you keep waiting for something to disrupt it. It feels unnatural to simply relax. You find yourself scanning for threats even when nothing is wrong. It's not because you're paranoid, it's because your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. This early training also shaped something else in you, an ability to hold pain, both yours and other people's. You learned to carry more than you should have. And now, as an adult, you often find yourself overwhelmed, not by big events, but by little burdens you've accumulated without noticing. You feel responsible for things that were never your responsibility. You apologize for things that were never your fault. You internalize emotions that do not belong to you simply because you're used to being the emotional container for others. Still, you rarely ask for support, because support in your mind is not something guaranteed. It feels like a privilege you haven't earned, or a risk that might lead to disappointment. You don't want to be a burden. You don't want to need too much. You don't want to take up space you're not sure you deserve, so you stay quiet. You stay composed. You tell people you're fine even when you're exhausted. And yet, beneath all of this, there is something remarkable about you, something rare. The depth with which you understand the human experience is something people spend years trying to cultivate. You didn't learn it through books or teachers. You learned it through life, through navigating emotional landscapes that were far too complex for your age. You became someone who can see others deeply, who can comfort them, who can translate their pain into understanding. And while it came from hardship, it became a kind of quiet power. But power doesn't erase fatigue, and empathy doesn't erase longing. You may have grown into a strong, perceptive adult, but inside you is a part that still aches for the childhood you never got to have, the safety you never felt, the permission to just be without having to constantly monitor the world around you. You're not wrong for feeling that ache. You're human. And your story isn't finished yet. If this session resonates with you so far, take a moment to like the video. It helps share this message with others who grew through the same silent battles. Growing up the way you didn't just sharpen your awareness of others, it also shaped the way you see yourself. Somewhere along the way, without realizing it, you adopted a silent rule. I must handle everything on my own. Not because you wanted to be independent, but because your life taught you that relying on others was unpredictable. Maybe the people you depended on were inconsistent. Maybe their love felt conditional. Maybe their emotions were too volatile, too heavy, too overwhelming. Maybe you learned early that if you didn't hold everything together, everything would fall apart. This created a strange kind of self-sufficiency, one that looks like strength from the outside, but feels like isolation on the inside. People see you as capable, reliable, steady. They trust you with their vulnerabilities. They come to you when they break, when they're hurting, when they need someone stable. But when you're the one hurting, you hesitate. You pull back. You swallow your needs. You convince yourself you'll deal with it later, or that you shouldn't trouble anyone with your pain. You don't struggle to help others, you only struggle to let others help you. It's not that you don't want connection, you do, deeply. But connection feels risky. Vulnerability feels dangerous. Emotions feel like responsibilities. And somewhere beneath all of that, There's a fear you rarely admit. The fear that if you let people see the places where you're still wounded, they'd pull away. So you build walls, even around the people who care about you. You stay guarded, not because you want distance, but because you want to avoid the kind of disappointment that shaped you in the first place. This is why you often feel like you're the strong one in every relationship, the caretaker, the listener, the one who understands. You know how to hold others gently because you were never held that way yourself. And ironically, this makes you magnetic to those who seek comfort. You become the grounding force in their lives. But being the grounding force in everyone else's life makes it difficult to find someone who can be grounding for you. Over time, this pattern begins to influence your identity. You start believing you're the one who must endure, the one who must remain steady, the one who must make things easier for everyone else. You don't realize you're doing it, but you're reenacting the role you were forced to play in childhood, the emotional anchor. And anchors, even when they're heavy, don't complain. They simply sink deeper. This is also why you often struggle with boundaries. Not because you don't understand them, but because they feel unnatural. Saying no feels like rejection. Taking space feels like abandonment. Putting yourself first feels like a betrayal. You've spent so long shrinking yourself to avoid conflict that expanding into your full emotional shape feels disorienting. Even when someone crosses a line, you hesitate before speaking up, wondering if you're overreacting, if your feelings are valid, if asserting yourself would cause tension you don't want to deal with. Your childhood taught you that your needs were interruptions, so as an adult, you treat them like inconveniences. You're not broken for feeling this way. You simply learned to survive in a world that didn't make room for your full humanity. And survival strategies, even when they're outdated, cling to you long after the danger has passed. But here's the truth. You don't need to earn the right to exist. You don't need to carry other people's emotions to feel worthy. You don't need to be perfect to deserve softness. In fact, some of the exhaustion you feel today isn't from the responsibilities in your current life. It's from the emotional armor you've been wearing since childhood. Armor that kept you safe then, but keeps you distant now. Armor that helped you survive emotional unpredictability, but now prevents you from experiencing emotional intimacy. One of the quiet tragedies of growing up too fast is that you become the adult everyone trusts, but rarely the adult who feels truly understood. You're seen as wise, strong, composed. But beneath that, there's a younger version of you who never learned how to express their needs openly. You learned to suppress your hurt because there was no space for it. You learned to be the calm one, even when you were overwhelmed. You learned to stay responsible even when you were falling apart internally. And now, as an adult, you find yourself longing for something simple yet profound. The feeling of being emotionally held by someone who doesn't need anything from you. The freedom to admit, I'm tired. The safety to be vulnerable without worrying about how your vulnerability might affect someone else. The luxury of resting without guilt. But rest, paradoxically, feels unsafe. Slowing down feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels unfamiliar. Your mind is used to scanning for emotional shifts, replaying scenarios, preparing for everything. You're constantly 3 steps ahead, not because you enjoy worrying, but because worry has always been your way of preventing disaster. This is why you often feel older than your age, not physically, But emotionally, you've carried experiences many people never face. You've translated pain into understanding. You've turned chaos into structure. And you've done it quietly, without recognition, without acknowledgement, without the support you deserved. Yet, despite all of this, there is a beauty in you that cannot be taught, a depth that cannot be replicated. You understand people in a way that makes them feel seen. You listen with your whole presence. You notice details that others overlook. You give kindness without being asked. These are not flaws. They are the result of a heart that learned to stay soft in a world that was not always soft to it. But even soft hearts need care. Even strong souls need rest. Even you, with all your resilience, deserve to be supported instead of always being the supporter. And that begins with a quiet, gentle decision to stop abandoning yourself, to learn what it feels like to have boundaries that protect rather than punish. To understand that asking for help is not weakness, it is human. To allow yourself the possibility of being cared for even if it feels unfamiliar. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally giving the parts of you that were neglected a chance to breathe. If this resonates with you, and you want to keep exploring these deeper truths, take a moment to subscribe to The Quiet Paradox. There's much more we can explore together. There comes a point in life where the patterns you learned in childhood begin to collide with the person you're trying to become. You feel it in moments when someone offers you kindness and you don't know how to receive it. You feel it when you're alone, and the silence feels heavier than it should. You feel it when your body reacts to situations that your mind insists are safe. It's the strange tension between who you were forced to be and who you actually are underneath all of that. There's a version of you that existed before the responsibilities, before the emotional labor, before the quiet vigilance. A version of you who once wanted things without guilt, who felt curiosity instead of fear, who believed that love didn't require performance. That version of you didn't disappear. They're still in there, waiting for permission to come back. But you've spent so long surviving that you don't know what thriving feels like. This inner conflict creates a kind of emotional double life. On the outside, you function, you work, you help, you manage, you endure. People admire you for it. They see strength, wisdom, resilience. They tell you they wish they were as composed as you. But the truth is, you're not composed because you're fearless. You're composed because fear taught you how to stay calm even in moments when everything inside you is shaking. You learned to hold yourself together because there was no one there to hold you. And so when someone compliments your strength, it doesn't always feel like a compliment. Sometimes it feels like they're praising the mask, not the person behind it. They see the calm surface, but not the waves underneath. They see the capability, but not the exhaustion. They see the competence, but not the loneliness that comes from always being the one who copes. There are nights when you lie awake and wonder why you still feel so responsible for things that aren't yours. Why you overthink every interaction. Why you replay conversations in your head. Why your mind keeps analyzing people long after the moment is over. It's because your nervous system learned that staying aware was the difference between chaos and safety. And even though your environment has changed, the wiring hasn't. That's why healing isn't as simple as letting go. Letting go implies dropping something heavy. But what you're carrying isn't something you're holding. It's something that grew inside you. You can't drop it. You have to unlearn it. Gently, slowly, compassionately. Healing begins in the moments when you finally recognize that your emotions are not inconveniences. They're signals, invitations, evidence that you are human, not a machine built to manage everyone else's world. Healing begins when you start noticing the ways you silence yourself, the ways you soften your voice, the ways you shrink, the ways you agree to things you don't want because you fear what will happen if you say no. You don't lose people when you set boundaries. You lose people who benefited from your lack of them. That truth is one of the hardest to accept because when you've lived your life avoiding conflict, even healthy boundaries feel dangerous. Your body reacts like you're doing something wrong. Your chest tightens. Your mind panics. But this reaction doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're rewiring decades of survival instinct. And slowly, with practice, something changes. You begin to feel a sense of ownership over your life. Moments that once triggered fear now feel neutral. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop explaining yourself excessively. You stop interpreting every silence as a threat. You start trusting that the people meant for you won't collapse when you show your truth. Eventually, you'll reach a moment where you realize something powerful. You no longer have to earn your place in people's lives. You don't need to be useful to be loved. You don't need to be strong to be valued. You don't need to predict emotional storms to feel safe. You can allow yourself to simply be imperfect, expressive, vulnerable, human. And when you reach that place, you'll start to meet yourself again. Not the version shaped by fear, but the version shaped by possibility. The version who deserves softness not because you give it to others, but because you exist. The version who can sit in silence without panic. The version who can ask for help without shame. The version who can allow others to show up for them without assuming it comes with conditions. People often talk about healing like it's a destination, but the truth is it's more like a homecoming. It's the slow walk back to the parts of yourself that you left behind to survive. It's the moment you look back at the younger version of you, the one who tried so hard to keep the world together, and finally say, you don't have to do that anymore. That inner child doesn't need to be dismissed or forgotten. They need to be acknowledged, held, heard. They need the adult version of you to become what they never had. Someone who protects them, listens to them, and doesn't abandon them when things get overwhelming. That's the real work. Not perfection, not performing strength, but finally, offering yourself the safety you never received. And something beautiful happens when you begin that process. The world feels less threatening. Relationships feel less draining. You no longer bend yourself into shapes that make you disappear. You speak more honestly. You rest without guilt. You feel instead of analyze. You live instead of anticipate. Your story isn't defined by what you lacked. It's defined by what you're reclaiming now. You survived a kind of emotional terrain that most people never walk through. And while it shaped your wounds, it also shaped your depth, your intuition, your compassion. None of that is accidental. None of that is weakness. It's evidence of a heart that has refused to close itself, even when it had every reason to. So if you find yourself resonating with this journey, if something inside you feels seen, understood, or softened, it's because part of you is ready to stop carrying everything alone, Ready to stop living in hyper-awareness, ready to be witnessed, ready to choose a life built on truth rather than fear. You don't have to rush this. You don't have to fix everything today. Just keep noticing yourself. Keep choosing gentleness over judgment. Keep allowing space for the version of you who never got to be fully alive. That is how healing begins, quietly, consistently, bravely. And if something in this final session reached a part of you that doesn't get touched often, let me know. Share what resonated. Tell me what part of this journey felt like your own. Your voice matters here. Your story matters here. Leave a comment and let it speak.